My name is Malik Drayton, and I've spent years perfecting the art of fading into the background at every holiday gathering. I learned early on that being the husband of Talia Hallberg meant accepting an unspoken hierarchy, her mother, Cynthia, reigning supreme, her siblings jockeying for favor, and everyone else slotting neatly into well-defined roles. I wore my title, public school administrator, like a badge of honor, but I wore its invisibility cloak as well, never challenging the carefully choreographed dance of social graces that unfolded in Cynthia's grand dining room. I understood my place. I was a guest, an accessory, the quiet partner. But nothing in my self-imposed training prepared me for what happened the night my daughter's name wasn't on the list. We arrived at the Hallberg estate just as dusk fell, the sky a bruised lavender behind the tall hedge that marked the property line. I parked our modest sedan beside the manicured drive, catching sight of the glow from hundreds of fairy lights strung across the mansion's facade. The scent of pine and roasted chestnuts drifted through the air. Holiday music tinkled from hidden speakers, and laughter spilled from the entrance like champagne popping from a bottle. Our daughter, Layla, 8 years old with a halo of tight curls and an imagination as vast as the universe, clutched my hand as we approached. She bounced on her toes, excitement making her shoulders bounce. I squeezed her hand, sharing in her wonder even as a pang of unease tightened in my chest. Inside, the house was a cathedral of luxury. The ceiling soared above crystal chandeliers, each prism scattering droplets of light across the polished marble floor. Every surface gleamed, every ornament perfectly placed. I could almost hear the hum of social media accounts poised to broadcast the evening's opulence. Cynthia adored a good photo op. She greeted us in a couture gown, pearls at her throat, her smile practiced but precise. "Welcome, welcome," she said, kissing Layla on both cheeks and giving me a perfunctory peck on the cheek. "So glad you could make it." Her eyes flicked over us, as if cataloging any detail that might later disappoint. I nodded and murmured thanks, and we stepped further into the party. All around us, relatives I barely recognized hugged and kissed, smiling with teeth too white and eyes too bright. Talia offered polite hellos as she glided between clusters of guests. I trailed behind her, my gaze shifting to Layla, who took it all in with wide eyes. She loved the wonder of these occasions, the taste of gingerbread, the glow of the tree, the promise of surprises under its branches. I watched her shoulders slump as she scanned the room. She knew something different tonight. The usual thrill was tempered by anticipation. For her stocking, for a small gift, for the fun of unwrapping and seeing her name in lights, even if just on a crumpled tag under a huge tree. Her breath hitched when she spied the gifts, each tied in designer paper and crowned with silk bows. She pointed at a tiny box just her size and pressed a finger to her lips as if to ask me whether she could sneak a peek. I shook my head, smiling, and ruffled her hair. Dinner was a gauntlet of formality. 6 courses, oysters, consommé, caviar, roast goose, cheese, and a chocolate yule log so elaborate it looked sculpted by an artisan. Throughout, I made small talk about budgets and lesson plans, nodding as lawyers discussed contracts and financiers compared bonus packages. Layla ate her mashed potatoes in silence, her gaze flicking from plate to plate. I wondered whether she felt the same pang I did, of being both present and unseen. When I caught her eye, I offered an encouraging smile. She returned it, bravely, before focusing on carving a path through the whipped potatoes with her fork. At last, Cynthia rose, her glass of champagne raised high. "Family," she announced, her voice clear and commanding. "Let us give thanks for another year of prosperity, health, and unity." There were murmured amens as forks clinked against plates and heads bowed briefly. I waited, heart-thumping, for the moment when Cynthia would nod to her butler, the butler would nod to the choir, and the choir would softly intone the first carol. Instead, the room hummed with polite conversation, and people turned to admire the tree. Then, in a coordinated flurry, everyone leaned forward to retrieve presents. The air crackled with the tearing of paper, the rustle of ribbons, the exclamation of delight. "Thank you," and Cynthia, cried a small girl 2 seats down, clutching a doll in a designer dress. "I love her," she squealed. Nearby, a cousin unwrapped a leather-bound journal. Another cousin, who lived in Europe and came only once a year, received a fur-lined shawl. I watched gift after gift pile up, each greeting met with a forced smile and a broth of praise. Layla's cheeks puffed as she watched, her little fist tightening around her napkin. I leaned closer and whispered, "Soon, baby. Your turn is coming." Her eyes met mine, hopeful. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Talia stood. The paper crunching ceased mid-rip. Conversation stuttered to a halt. All eyes swung toward her as if a spotlight had illuminated a stage. She held an envelope in her hand, cream-colored and heavy, tied with a thin red ribbon. She placed it gently on the floor at Layla's feet. "This was supposed to be open last," she said, her voice steady. A hush descended. Even the crackling flames in the hearth seemed to pause. Everyone leaned toward the envelope as if it contained the night's secrets. Layla knelt and ran her small fingers over the ribbon, then untied it slowly. My throat tightened as I knelt beside her, heart pounding. She pulled the flap open, revealing two documents, one a thick, embossed certificate, the other a smaller paper that glinted in the tree light. The room held its breath. I watched as Layla's brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in the dawning of understanding. She removed the papers and glanced at me. I smiled, urging her on with my eyes. Then, with that same curious bravery she'd shown her whole life, she unfolded the certificate and read it aloud in a small voice. "Irrevocable education trust in the name of Layla Drayton." The room buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Cynthia's lips parted, her posture rigid. Talia's lips curved in a soft, proud smile. But there was more. Layla unfolded the second document. "Property deed, 123, Maple Street, Arbor Grove." I swallowed hard. That house was the one we toured months ago, the one Talia fell in love with, the one we vowed we'd never afford. Layla's finger traced the words. She looked up at Cynthia. "Mom," she asked. The air trembled. Cynthia managed a stiff clap, as if she were applauding a performance rather than her granddaughter's triumph. "Well," she said, voice tight. "That is unexpected." Talia's eyes softened as she reached out and held Layla's hand. "Happy Christmas," she said. "New year. New life." I watched Layla's chest rise and fall as relief and wonder mingled on her face. I felt the walls around me crack as years of silent acquiescence splintered. In that moment, I was no longer the invisible husband or the overlooked father. I was a witness to my daughter's revolution. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in miracles again. I still remember the first time I met Talia's family outside of a classroom. We were wrapping up finals week at the university, and she invited me to her parents' home for a celebratory dinner. I'd walked into their marble-floored foyer with my palms sweaty and my threadbare messenger bag slung over one shoulder, feeling more like an interloper than a guest. Cynthia greeted me at the top of a sweeping staircase, her posture impeccable, her smile gracious but distant. She kissed my cheek and studied my worn shoes as though they were an archaeological find. Her father, Arthur, extended a gracious handshake in a study lined with antique tomes, the scent of leather and old paper thick in the air. I told him I was a graduate teaching assistant with hopes of becoming a school administrator. He nodded politely, then steered the conversation toward the low review where Talia had excelled. It was in that moment, as I fumbled for words about classroom management and budget constraints, that I understood I was marrying into a world that defined success by law firm partnerships, legacy surnames, and properties that spanned continents. After that evening, I fell into the rhythm of double lives. In one, I was Malik Drayton, a scholarship student who spent evenings grading essays, weekends tutoring underclassmen, and nights dreaming of the day I might run a public school with integrity and heart. In the other, I was the man Talia introduced at charity galas and bar mitzvahs, touted as the dedicated professional who'd supported her ambitions. I learned to smile at compliments that were qualifiers in disguise. How wonderful that someone so accomplished has a partner who keeps things grounded, Cynthia would say, her eyes flicking over my conservative attire as if checking for defects. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Talia loved me for who I was, that the quiet strength I brought to our relationship was the same strength I'd pour into our family someday. Yet every correction of my speech, every fleeting glance at my mismatched cufflinks, reminded me that I was always on trial. Living with that tension was an education unto itself. I learned to read the room, to know when to contribute an informed opinion and when to sit back, arms folded, nodding. I learned to laugh on cue, to wince discreetly when someone derided public sector inefficiency, and to never ask for help unloading the car after holiday gatherings. Talia never forced me to play a part one wasn't comfortable with, but she mastered diplomacy in a way I admired and envied. She floated through her family's world like water through lattice stone. She flowed where she needed to be seen and slipped away when she needed respite. I, by contrast, was cement stuck where I was placed. She tempted me with glimpses of her world's warmth. Her childhood home was filled with classical music, art books, and a library in the attic where she showed me her earliest records of academic triumphs. But I also saw the frigid underbelly. The way her siblings competed for validation, the way gratitude came with an asterisk, and the way love was measured in shares of an inheritance rather than simple kindness. When our wedding day came, I stood at the altar feeling equal parts exhilaration and dread. Talia's eyes glowed with certainty. She was resolute as she promised her vows. But behind her was a congregation of polite faces, each silently appraising my suitability. Her mother sat in the front row, her lips pressed into a measured smile, holding a gift wrapped in ivory paper. It was a gesture of welcome, but I felt its edges like a blade. That gift contained a pair of monogrammed cufflinks, an attempt at acceptance, I suppose. But beneath the gleaming initials was a reminder of the world I was entering and the world I already called home. Over the years, I balanced the scales by giving my all to Talia and Layla, coaching spelling bees, attending school board meetings, and hosting Thanksgiving dinners for our friends. I drove the minivan on rainy mornings, packed lunches in mismatched paper bags, and read bedtime stories under a low-watt bulb when the rest of the Hallberg household said children should sleep early. When Layla was born, her first cry echoed in the delivery room like a trumpet heralding my greatest achievement. Talia's mother hovered beside us, camera poised to capture the moment, but Cynthia's face was inscrutable. She congratulated us with a kiss on Layla's forehead, then turned away, perhaps disappointed the baby didn't arrive in a designer layette. I know now that Talia married me because she saw my heart before she noticed my shoes. She loved the fact that I could listen to her hopes and fears without judgment, that I believed in her intellect and ambition more than I believed in any family legacy. She drew the audacity to believe in us from every quiet promise we made in the small apartment we shared during her first year of law school. I tested the depths of my own courage when I told her I would move across the country for her dream job, even though it meant leaving my aging mother and the community I'd served for years. She cried when I handed in my resignation, and I cried with her, imagining the pride on Cynthia's face when she realized her daughter's husband was committed to raising their child in a supportive school district. Yet I couldn't escape the feeling that I was trading one invisible role for another. In Cynthia's eyes, I would always be less than, less wealthy, less connected, less experienced. Every compliment carried an echo of, for someone like you. But with Talia, I was enough. In her warm embrace on quiet nights, beneath the soft glow of our kitchen lamp, her whispered affirmation met every doubt I'd ever harbored. She made me believe that our love was stronger than a gilded invitation or a curated family narrative. As we moved forward from that Christmas party toward a life of our own making, I carried both worlds with me like two bookends. On one side rested the memory of that frosty foyer and the marble floors where I first felt like a stranger. On the other side gleamed the home we would build, one where Layla's laughter would echo off simple walls, where her curiosity would be celebrated rather than micromanaged, and where her name would never be left off the list. From the moment Layla arrived in our lives, she brought with her a world of wonder I never knew I was missing. I remember the first time I held her in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, curls damp from the bath, her eyes wide as saucers, as though she had descended straight from the stars. In that instant, I vowed that she would always know how deeply she was loved, how fiercely her mother, and I would protect her innocence and curiosity. But the Hallberg fold viewed her differently. To them, she was an anomaly, a surprise puzzle piece that did not comfortably slot into their pristine portrait of tradition. As Layla grew from infant to inquisitive toddler, she carried herself with a blend of gentle confidence and wild imagination. She spoke in paragraphs before she could walk in a straight line, her first words unfolding like a story. "Daddy, why does the moon follow us home?" Or, "Mommy, what do worms dream about?" I would watch her at the park, crouched in the dirt, coaxing snails onto her palm, marveling at the shape of their shells. I took pride in her fascination with the natural world, even as Talia's family coughed politely when she dragged them toward a muddy flower bed at one of Cynthia's garden parties. Her baptism, planned by Cynthia with all the trappings of a high society event, was the first time I sensed the gulf between Layla's spirit and her grandmother's expectations. The church's stained glass stonework glowed behind us as we entered, Layla wrapped in heirloom lace that had baptized Hallberg children for generations. As the minister poured water on her forehead, Layla squealed with delight at the coolness, twisting to peer at the drop sliding down her cheek. Gist chuckled indulgently, but I saw the flush on her face, equal parts surprise and joy. When the service ended and the reception began in the grand ballroom, Layla wandered off to examine the poinsettia arrangements, plucking a leaf to show me. I followed her, witnessing the slight frown pass across Cynthia's face when she realized her granddaughter was not standing beside the table of sponsors. By her third birthday, Layla had amassed an impressive collection of interests. She adored books, she could recite entire paragraphs from tattered fairy tale volumes and insisted on reading bedtime stories by flashlight long after the rest of us had dozed off. She painted with abandon, splattering canvases with color until the walls bore the evidence of her creative explorations. She built forts from couch cushions and declared them kingdoms in her own right, complete with knights, dragons, and secret passageways. But at every Hallberg gathering, I watched her retreat into herself, her smile dimming as she surveyed rows of expensive wrapped gifts and the practiced small talk performed by adults who barely noticed her. The year she turned 5, Talia and I decided to host a small celebration in our own home, inviting a handful of her closest friends instead of the full Hallberg retinue. We filled the backyard with balloons, laid out sandwiches on mismatched plates, and set up a table of art supplies for painting. We watched her face light up as her friends flocked to the craft table, glitter in their hair, paint smudges on their cheeks. The laughter that filled our yard was the truest sound I'd ever heard. When Cynthia called afterward to ask why we had chosen such a casual venue, Talia replied, "Because this is where she feels like herself." The line went quiet, and the next time we saw them, Layla's gift, handmade macarons arranged in pastel hues, had been remade into a boxed set of fancy chocolates that Layla would politely decline. At family events, I learned to sense the moment Layla felt most invisible. It happened whenever the gathering turned to diplomas and board positions, to the latest door knock campaign for alumni donations, to the value of birthright trust funds. While cousins received envelopes thick with checks and designers showed off the latest leather goods, Layla would fidget in her seat and glance at Talia and me, her question unspoken. "Where is my gift?" More than once, I saw her blink back tears before tucking her feet beneath her chair, rotating a strand of curl between her fingers. Each time I slipped an encouraging smile her way, she returned it with a brave nod and a determination that belied her heartbreak. I resolved to shield her from these moments, to celebrate her uniqueness rather than suppress it. On her birthday each year, I asked her what she truly wanted. One year it was a telescope so she could study planets. Another year it was a collection of storybooks in Braille. She said, "So I can read in the dark." I scoured secondhand shops and online auctions until I found every item on her list, wrapping them in bright paper and hiding them under our tree. When we gave them to her in private, she threw her arms around me and Talia, thanking us with a kiss on each cheek and a profusion of giggles. But Christmas with the Hallbergs was different. This year, when Layla proudly presented the watercolor painting she'd labored over for weeks, swaths of blue for the sky, green strokes for rolling hills, a smiling stick-figure family at its heart. Cynthia cradled it in her hands as a prop for Instagram stories, then quietly slipped it back onto the gift table without comment. My chest tightened as I saw Layla's shoulders slump for the first time that night. I pulled her close and whispered, "You made that for them, and it's beautiful. Never forget that." As the evening wore on and gift after gift found its owners, I watched Talia's eyes flick between Layla and her mother, steely resolve hardening in her gaze. I did not yet know the plan she carried in her purse, the envelopes that would not contain jewelry or vouchers but a promise of freedom for our daughter. But I felt the power in her determination, the quiet strength that had first drawn me to her years ago. I squeezed Layla's hand under the table, offering silent solidarity. When at last Talia rose with that cream-colored envelope, handing it to Layla and announcing it was supposed to be open last. I saw Layla's eyes widen in disbelief, a cautious spark ignited deep within her. And in that moment, I knew we had rewritten the story of her place in the world, no longer the overlooked child, but the radiant center of her own unfolding adventure. Cynthia's Christmas parties were a spectacle of precision and polish, each detail curated to present the Hallberg family as paragons of taste and tradition. From the moment we stepped through those gilded doors, I felt the pull of performance, manicured lawns trimmed to military exactness, wreaths hung at perfect height, and an army of staff scuttling in the background like well-trained shadows. Talia moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her laughter light as spun sugar, while I watched her in admiration and dread, admiration for her grace under scrutiny. Dread for the knowledge that every misstep I made would reverberate louder in this house than in any other. Layla clung to my hand as we entered the grand hall, her tiny frame dwarfed by soaring ceilings and sweeping staircases wrapped in garlands of evergreen and holly. The room pulsed with warm light, but the atmosphere felt brittle, as though a misplaced ornament might shatter the carefully maintained facade. The guests circulated in clusters, their smiles polite, their laughter measured, their compliments delivered with the precision of a choreographed dance. I spotted a cousin whispering behind a champagne flute, her eyes flicking toward us as though noting an anomaly in the tableau. My daughter's mismatched sweater and scuffed shoes a stark contrast to the sequin party dresses and patent leather loafers that surrounded us. We joined the receiving line, where Cynthia stood like a queen on her velvet throne, greeting each guest with a tailored remark. "Tom, how's the firm?" "Jean, love the color on you." Each greeting was pared down to its most felicitous form, free of extraneous warmth. When I reached her, she offered me a mechanical smile and said, "Malik, so glad you could join us. I hear you've been busy with the new school budget." I nodded, careful to phrase my answer succinctly, to convey competence without inviting further questions. Talia slipped her arm through mine, her smile unfaltering, and steered us down the line. Once introductions concluded, we drifted toward the buffet table, where a pastry chef arranged desserts like tiny sculptures. Layla's eyes widened at the sight of miniature gingerbread houses and intricately piped eclairs. I lifted her onto my hip so she could inspect the sugary display. She pointed at a tray of macarons in pastel hues and whispered, "Can I try one?" I smiled and selected two, one pistachio, one rose. She bit into the pistachio with reverent pleasure, her eyes closing as if she were savoring a rare delicacy. A nearby guest tooted softly, and I sensed disapproval over indulging a child so conspicuously. I pulled Layla close and whispered, "Enjoy it. This is your night, too." She grinned and pressed the macaron wrapper into my hand, then darted away to join a group of children playing beneath a crystal chandelier. I followed her to a small gathering of cousins clustered around a tray of finger sandwiches. They nibbled delicate cucumber triangles while discussing advanced placement courses and SAT prep, voices hushed with adult earnestness. Layla waited politely, her head tilted as she listened, then spoke up in her clear, melodic voice. "Do you think worms have friends?" The question halted the conversation like a dropped glass. Heads turned, collars straightened, and the children looked at her as though she had uttered a phrase in a foreign tongue. I hustled over, my cheeks burning. I whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetie. Let's go find something else," and offered her my hand. But she tugged the macaron wrapper from my grip and said, "It's okay, Daddy. I just thought they might." Even her curiosity felt defiant here. We drifted toward the center of the room, where a grand fir tree presided over the festivities. Beneath its branches, precisely stacked gifts reflected designer labels, Hermes, Burberry, Valentino, all arranged by color and size. Layla's gaze shifted from box to box. I knelt beside her and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "They'll call your name soon," I whispered, though neither of us truly believed it. She offered a small, hopeful smile, then lifted her chin and surveyed the scene with the quiet dignity she carried even in the face of exclusion. The family portrait followed, a ritual wherein every Hallberg member assembled for the annual photograph. As we positioned ourselves before the camera, I felt Layla's hand tremble in mine. She clutched my fingers and whispered, "Will I be in it?" I smiled and squeezed back, trying to convey confidence. Behind us, Cynthia barked instructions, more to the left. "Chin up. Talia, straighten your skirt." In the commotion, Layla and I slipped to the side, our heads barely visible in the frame. I glanced at the photographer, who adjusted his lens without a second thought. I considered pulling Layla into the center, rewriting the script, but last year I would have. This year, I held back, learning the lesson that Talia's family taught so well. In their world, every move is calculated, every gesture codified. When the photographer clicked his final shot, a murmur of relief rippled through the group. People mingled again, returning to appetizers and small talk. The room hummed with the flicker of candlelight, and I realized my cheeks were damp with tears I dared not shed. Layla leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Why do they make it so hard?" she asked, voice soft. I stroked her hair, my heart breaking. "They don't know how special you are," I said. "They're afraid of something they don't understand." She looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. I'm not afraid, she replied. I'm just me. I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, exactly. Across the room, I saw Talia watching us, her expression unreadable. In that moment, I understood the weight she carried, juggling her loyalty to her family and her duty as a mother to protect our daughter. I straightened my shoulders and stood, taking Layla's hand. Come on, I said. Let's find your grandmother. She looked at me, puzzled, but allowed me to guide her. We approached Cynthia, who was engaged in conversation with two board members. I cleared my throat. And Cynthia? She turned, her smile clinical. Yes. I reached into my pocket and retrieved Layla's watercolor painting, a vibrant scene of family under a bright sky, with a tiny figure at the edge looking on. Cynthia's eyes flicked to it, then back to mine. She made this for you, I said. Her lips pressed thin as she accepted the gift. Layla hovered behind me, her eyes shining. It's very unique, Cynthia said, her tone flat. Layla's face fell, but I bent and whispered, thank you for accepting her gift. Cynthia nodded, and the moment was over. We retreated to a quiet corner, and I wrapped an arm around Layla as she exhaled. I'm proud of you, I told her. She leaned into me. Thank you for being with me, she whispered. In that crowded room full of curated perfection, we found an imperfect moment of truth. Love doesn't require an invitation, and belonging isn't determined by appearances. And though we still waited for the call that would never come, we knew our own values were richer than any box under that tree. Just as the last notes of carols faded and I was gathering our coats, ready to slip away from the performance of polite smiles and empty compliments, Talia rose from her seat with a quiet authority that rippled through the room. Conversation sputtered to a halt mid-sentence, and the soft clink of silver flatware on china paused as every eye turned toward her. My pulse skipped. This was the moment I'd sensed coming but could never have predicted in its full force. She reached into her purse and drew out an envelope, cream-colored and substantial, tied with a slender ribbon that glowed like a promise beneath the tree's twinkling lights. My breath caught as she placed it at Layla's feet, sliding into position with the deliberation of a chess grandmaster. For an instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. Even the firelight in the hearth flickered with anticipation. Guests shifted uneasily on plush velvet seats. Cynthia's perfectly arched brow rose an inch. My stomach nodded, and I knelt beside Layla, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Talia's voice was calm, steady, so steady that it seemed to echo in the sudden hush. This was supposed to be open last, she said, and the words landed like a verdict. Layla knelt, her small fingers trembling as she undid the ribbon, each loop sliding free with a soft whisper of fabric. She glanced at me, her eyes wide and questioning, and I nodded, voice caught in my throat. As she lifted the flap, the room leaned in closer, as if gravity itself had shifted toward that lone envelope. She withdrew 2 documents, holding them up so the golden glow of the Christmas lights flickered across their embossed seals. The first was a notarized certificate establishing an irrevocable education trust in her name, a fund seeded with an amount so substantial it would cover tuition at any school she chose, at home or abroad. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. I saw Cynthia's fingers twitch, the skin paling where her knuckles pressed against her palm. Layla, still kneeling, traced the words with her fingertip, her breath quick and shallow. I swallowed hard, my voice steady when I spoke. This is for your future, I said, and laid my hand gently over hers. Because we believe in you. Her curls brushed my cheek, and I felt the weight of every injustice she'd already endured. But there was more. Layla unfolded the second document, a property deed bearing Talia's signature and mine, declaring our ownership of a 3-bedroom home in a town 3 states away. The house we had admired under dusty afternoon sky, the one I had joked we could never afford. It stood there now in black and white, ours to claim when the new year began. A murmur rose as cousins exchanged shocked glances. Even the seasoned socialites looked uncertain, as though someone had slipped ashtrays beneath their pristine carpets. Talia's face was serene. She held Layla's gaze and said, "We're moving. New year. New life." The words landed softly but firmly, like stones tossed into a still pond, sending ripples through the room. My chest tightened as I surveyed the tableau. Families of privilege sputtering for a response, a grandmother's pride crumbling behind poker-faced restraint, and my daughter, our daughter, standing taller than any of them. Layla looked around, processing each stunned expression, then back at the documents in her hand. Her small voice trembled and yet rang clear. "Are you sure?" Talia nodded. "Completely." I rose and slipped an arm around each of them, a single family in a room built for many. I felt a fierce protectiveness flare inside me, burning away years of quiet acceptance. We would chart our own course, far from this stage of forced admiration. Cynthia finally found her composure and offered a clipped, "Well, that's big news." Her tone was respectful but edged with something I'd never seen before, uncertainty. She glanced between the envelope at Layla's feet and the opulent tree towering overhead, then back at us, as though searching for the script she would have written for this scene. There was no script. Talia's smile remained calm as she tucked an arm through mine. "Thank you for celebrating with us," she said, and I knew those words were genuine. For once, the celebration was ours to define. As guests rose to offer cautious congratulations, I watched Layla's chest swell with pride. She slipped the documents into her coat pocket and slipped her hand into mine without letting go. When we left, there was no lingering to pick at crumbs of dessert or rehash awkward silences. We stepped into the crisp night air, the echo of fairy lights receding behind us. Layla tucked her other hand into her coat, clutching the envelope's ribbon as though it were a tether linking her to a new beginning. Talia exhaled, a long, steady release. "I couldn't let her fade into the background," she said softly. I kissed her temple and held her close. As we drove away, Layla leaned forward in the back seat, peering through the rear window at the glittering house that had been our prison of etiquette. She whispered, "I can't wait to see my new room." I turned in the seat, eyes gleaming with pride. "Neither can I," I said. And just like that, the night became ours, a promise wrapped in courage, tied with love, and meant to be opened, last. We didn't wait for the after-party chatter to die down. The moment we closed the car door behind us, Layla leaned against the roof and traced the ribbon's twist between her fingers. I settled into the driver's seat, the engine's hum a warm blanket against the cold night. Talia slipped into the passenger seat, her fingers brushing mine as she opened her door. I could still feel the energy of the room, the stunned silence that had followed her announcement. But in the quiet of our car, the world felt different, lighter, brimming with possibility. Layla's voice came soft from the back seat. "What's an education trust, Daddy?" Her question was both innocent and profound. I glanced in the rearview mirror at her wide eyes framed by curls. "It's like a special piggy bank that can only be used for school," I explained. "For books, tuition, anything you need to learn and grow." She nodded, processing the concept with the careful seriousness she applied to everything. "And the house?" she asked. "Is it really ours?" I smiled. "It is. A place where you can run barefoot in the grass, paint on the walls, and never worry about who sees the mess you make." Talia reached around the seat and ruffled Layla's hair. "A fresh start," she said. "Somewhere we belong without having to fit their mold." I put the car in gear and eased onto the road, the lights of the Hallberg mansion shrinking behind us. "I'm proud of you both," I told them. "Tonight, you showed everyone what family really means." When we arrived at our apartment, the tension of the evening dissolved into laughter. Layla clambered onto the couch, the envelope clutched like a treasure map. She carefully unfolded the deed again, marveling at the address. "Will there be squirrels?" she asked, eyes bright. I laughed. "There will be whatever you want, maybe an entire zoo." She grinned and hugged the papers to her chest. "I can't wait to explore." Talia poured hot cocoa into 3 mismatched mugs and settled between us. Steam curled above our heads like wraiths of expectation released. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she said, tracing the rim of her mug with a fingertip. "I wasn't sure I had the guts to follow through." I took her hand. "You did what had to be done," I said. "Because of you, she'll never wonder if she mattered." Layla leaned forward, eyes shining in the lamplight. "Can we move now?" she asked. I ruffled her curls. "We can start packing tomorrow." That night, sleep came easily, dreams of wide-open fields and new paint colors dancing behind my eyelids. In the morning, I awoke to sunlight slanting through our curtains and the scent of cinnamon in the air. Layla was already at the kitchen table, the envelope spread out like a centerpiece. She pointed to the trust document. "I want to learn everything I can," she said. "Physics, history, art, everything." My chest swelled with pride. "And you will," I promised. "Your education is as limitless as your imagination." Over the next weeks, packing became an adventure. We sorted through boxes, deciding which memories to take and which to leave behind. Layla tucked her favorite storybooks into a small crate. I wrapped them in tissue paper, careful not to smudge the ink. Talia labeled furniture for donation, her eyes misty at each familiar piece. I watched her with admiration, how she balanced justice with compassion, action with grace. Cynthia's calls came sporadically. She left a voicemail, We're here if you need anything. The words sounded hollow. I considered returning the call, but decided we had enough on our plates. This new chapter wasn't about apologies. It was about building something authentic. Instead, I replied to Talia's text, not this time. She read it and smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. On moving day, the sky was a calm blue canvas, the air crisp with the promise of promise. Friends from our neighborhood helped load the truck, offering hugs and well wishes. Layla stood beside me as the last box went in. She placed the cream-colored envelope into my hand and said, "Thank you." I tucked it into my jacket pocket. "Thank you for trusting us," I replied. As we climbed into the cab of the moving van, Talia pressed her head to my shoulder. Layla climbed into the back seat of our car, her curls bobbing as she waved goodbye to the apartment that had been home. I started the engine and guided the van onto the highway, our little caravan of possibility. We drove into the unknown together, hearts full and spirits free. In that moment, I knew we weren't just moving houses. We were planting roots for a life defined not by expectations, but by our own choices. Choices made in love, sealed in courage, and meant to be opened last. The morning after we left, I woke to the sound of birdsong instead of carolers' laughter. Sunlight filtered through new curtains I'd installed the night before, painting stripes of gold across the bedroom floor. Talia was already up, sipping coffee at our kitchen table, a stack of moving boxes behind her like sentinels guarding our fresh start. Layla patted in moments later, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, Rosie, and wearing pajamas that bore traces of last night's hot cocoa. She climbed into my lap as I joined them, and I could feel the peaceful energy humming around our little family, an energy that came from choice rather than obligation. Over breakfast, we exchanged ideas for the day, labeling boxes, assembling bedroom furniture, scouting the yard for the perfect spot to hang the tire swing we'd promised Layla. She bounced ideas off us like confetti, her excitement contagious. After she scattered to unpack her art supplies, Talia and I lingered at the table. I watched her as she sipped her coffee, the faint lines at the corner of her eyes softening in contentment. "She's doing so well," I said. "Better than I ever imagined." Talia reached across the table and took my hand. "She's always been strong," she replied. "We just gave her the chance to show it." While Talia measured the walls for shelving, I carried a stack of boxes to the living room and began erecting the bookshelf I'd purchased months ago in anticipation of this move. As I hammered the last nail, I thought back to the evening of the envelope, the shift in the room's energy, the way power realigned itself with a simple act of love. It struck me then, and again now, that freedom often arrives in the quiet aftermath of a bold choice. By midday, the house was alive with activity. Talia painted stripes on Layla's walls, transforming plain cream into a horizon of lavender and seafoam green. Layla hovered nearby, calling out suggestions, more stars in the corner, and a unicorn by the window. I anchored my new bookcase to the wall and stacked novels, textbooks, and picture books according to the order Layla specified, storybooks on the top shelf, science volumes below, and her favorite pencil case and sketchbook resting on the lowest shelf for easy reach. She clapped when I was done, and I lifted her onto the bottom shelf for a quick hug. Later, Talia called from the yard, her voice carrying through the open window. "Can you help me with the garden bed?" I wiped sweat from my brow and stepped outside. The sun felt warm but not oppressive, and the scent of freshly turned soil filled the air. Talia knelt beside a border of wildflowers, her hands deep in earth. "I thought we could plant lavender here," she said, indicating a space beneath the window where morning light pooled. "For butterflies." I smiled and knelt beside her, matching her movements. "And maybe some mint over there, near the back door?" Together we arranged the seedlings, our conversation drifting from weekend plans to our dreams for Layla's future, hikes in national parks, art classes at the community center, and perhaps a small science fair project when she felt ready. As we worked, I felt the weight of the Hallberg mansion recede, replaced by a tangible sense of ownership that extended beyond deeds and trusts. This yard was ours to shape, these walls ours to fill with laughter, tears, and everything in between. I thought of the envelope again, not as a one-time gesture, but as a seed planted in fertile ground. How it would grow, I couldn't know yet, but I felt certain it would flourish under the care of our little family. That afternoon, Cynthia's voice rang on my cell phone. I glanced at the number, and inertia nearly made me ignore it. But then I remembered Layla, dreaming under her lavender walls, and I answered. Cynthia's tone was formal. Malik, Talia, I wanted to congratulate you on your new home, she began, and I listened as she complimented our choice of location and expressed curiosity about the neighborhood. I answered with measured warmth, careful not to reveal the relief I felt at this distance. When she asked if she might visit to see the house, I exchanged a glance with Talia. Of course, I said. We'd love to show you around in a couple of weeks. She murmured thanks and hung up. I slid the phone into my pocket and exhaled. Talia stretched, brushing soil from her palms. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded. I think this is the first genuine congratulations we've received, I said. She smiled, and we stood side by side, surveying the budding garden. Let her come, Talia said quietly. But on our terms. I wrapped an arm around her waist. Agreed. That evening, Layla curled up with Rosie and a pile of picture books, drifting into dreams of lavender fields and butterfly wings. Talia and I sat on the porch, sharing a quiet glass of wine as dusk settled. The tire swing swayed gently in the breeze. We did it, I said. We gave her more than a gift. We gave her choice. Talia leaned her head on my shoulder. And she will soar, she replied. Under the soft glow of the porch light, I felt the full weight of that truth. Our daughter's life was now unbound by expectation, a gift wrapped in courage, sealed with love, and meant to grow forever. The sunrise on our first morning in the new house felt like a benediction, golden light spilling through the skylight onto hardwood floors that stretched into rooms we'd yet to make our own. I lay in bed listening to the soft snores of Talia beside me and the quiet murmur of rain on the roof to hear. In this place we chose together, every sound was a promise of possibility rather than protocol. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway toward Layla's room, where the door was cracked open. Inside, she lay curled beneath a patchwork comforter, her stuffed rabbit Rosie tucked under her arm. Her curls fanned out on the pillow like a halo, and I paused to watch her breathing even, peaceful. When she stirred, opening her eyes to find me silhouetted in the doorway, her smile was a burst of sunshine that warmed me from the inside out. Morning, Daddy, she whispered, voice thick with sleep. I knelt beside her and kissed her forehead. Good morning, sweetheart, I replied. Sleep well? She nodded, curling against my side. I had the best dream, she said. There was a castle made of books, and I was the queen. I smiled, brushing her curls back. I like that dream, I said. You can be queen of anything you imagine. Her eyes fluttered shut again, and I let her drift back to sleep, lingering in the doorway until her breathing slowed. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of brewing coffee and the last embers of cinnamon rolls cooling on a wire rack. Talia stood at the counter, flipping through a notebook where she'd sketched ideas for the living room. Hey, I said, dropping a kiss on her cheek. She turned, her eyes bright. I drew a layout for a reading nook by the window, she explained. I thought we could add some built-in benches and cushions. I glanced out at the yard, where a single daffodil bloomed amid fresh mulch. I love it, I said. Let's do it. She smiled, a quiet flash of victory, and I knew she felt it too. The freedom to shape this space however we pleased. Later that morning, as we unpacked boxes in the living room, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. How's the new place? Pics. I took a photo of Talia assembling a bookshelf and texted back. Love it. You have to come see. I set the phone aside and found myself replaying the Hallberg voicemail in my mind, Cynthia's tentative congratulations, her curious tone. Part of me wanted to tell her we didn't need permission to be happy, but another part wondered if this distance might finally give her the room to see us without expectation. I shook my head and turned my attention back to the task at hand, sorting through a box of family photos that Talia had labeled memories to cherish. We spread them across the coffee table, snapshots of birthdays, graduations, and quiet Sunday mornings in our old apartment. There was the photo of Layla's first wobbly steps, Talia's proud grin shining as bright as the flash, and one of me wiping chocolate cake frosting off her cheek. I realized how much of our life had been lived in stolen moments, squeezed between obligations and obligations. Here, surrounded by empty walls and empty shelves, each photo felt like a declaration of who we were and who we would become. By midday, we took a break for lunch on the back porch. Talia made grilled cheese sandwiches while I brewed lemonade, and we ate at the picnic table we'd found at a yard sale last week, painted bright yellow and patched with love. Layla sat between us, narrating the plot of a story she was writing about a dragon detective. She spoke with such vivid detail that I felt transported into her world, a world she crafted entirely on her own terms. I glanced at Talia, whose eyes shone with pride and relief. For the first time in as long as I could remember, we were writing our own story without an editor looking over our shoulders. That afternoon, we ventured into town to introduce ourselves to our neighbors. We met Mrs. Patel, who brought over homemade samosas, and Mr. Reynolds, an elderly widower with a gentle smile who offered to teach Layla how to fish in the nearby lake. Each interaction reminded me that community wasn't about pedigree or pedigree's absence. It was about kindness, curiosity, and shared moments. When we returned home, the house felt fuller, as though the walls had absorbed a measure of warmth from each new connection. That evening, as dusk settled, we lit candles on the dining table and prepared a simple meal of pasta and salad. The flickering light danced on Talia's hair and Layla's upturned face as she told us about the book she'd finished and wanted to discuss over dinner. I listened, heart swelling, realizing how rare it was to be wholly present, to be both the listener and the support rather than a silent guest. After dinner, we moved to the living room, sank into the cushions, and read together by lamplight. When the hour grew late, I carried Layla to bed, tucking her in beneath her mural of stars and unicorns. She reached for me and said, "Thank you for giving me my castle." I stroked her hair and whispered, "Thank you for showing me the way." As I tiptoed out, I knew that the aftershocks of that Christmas night would ripple through our lives forever, but in this silence, I heard something far louder than whispers of doubt, the steady, unshakable pulse of a family newly free. Within days of settling in, life gained a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and grounding. Weekday mornings began with laughter instead of tension. I would rouse Layla with a gentle shake and a promise of pancakes, while Talia brewed coffee and reviewed her part-time teaching schedule. Our new neighborhood unfurled itself in small acts of kindness. Away from the mail carrier, a nod from the barista at the local cafe, an invitation from Mr. Reynolds to plant tomatoes in his garden. Each interaction added a brushstroke to the portrait of the new life Talia had announced that Christmas night, until at last it looked more like home than any polished mansion ever had. One Saturday, Talia suggested we host an informal gathering, a welcome barbecue, she called it, inviting neighbors and a handful of old friends. I prepped the grill in our fenced backyard while Layla arranged bottles of lemonade on the picnic table. Talia carefully laid out bowls of coleslaw and pasta salad, her eyes alight with the thrill of hospitality untethered from expectations. As the sun dipped low, neighbors trickled in, the Patels with a tray of samosas, Mrs. Jenkins with her famous chocolate chip cookies, and a group of kids who scampered to the tire swing before anyone else. I flipped burgers, chatting easily with people who judged me by the warmth of my greeting rather than the label on my business card. When Talia joined me, handing me another spatula, I caught her eye and saw pride shining in her smile. We had created a space defined by authenticity, not artifice. That evening, as twilight deepened, I stood by the fence watching our daughter dart between adults and children alike. She held court beside the fire pit, recounting stories of dragons solving mysteries, her animated gestures melting away any lingering shyness. A neighbor asked if she'd read The Case of the Missing Sunbeam, and Layla corrected him with delightful precision, naming characters and plot twists. The neighbor laughed and said, "You're quite the storyteller." I felt my chest swell with pride. This was the child I had always known, curious, confident, unapologetically herself. In her laughter, I heard the echoes of that night when her name had been left off the list, now replaced by the certainty that she belonged wherever she chose to stand. After the guests departed and the embers flickered low, Talia and I sat on the steps leading into the house. The yard was strewn with the evidence of community, paper plates, napkins, and a scattering of confetti from a hastily improvised birthday celebration for one of the kids. "Look at this," I said, sweeping a hand across the scene. "Our own kind of tradition." Talia leaned against me, and for a moment we simply breathed in the cool night air. "We've come a long way," she murmured. I nodded, thinking of Cynthia's voice on the voicemail, still hovering like an unspent apology. A few days later, that apology finally arrived in person. Cynthia appeared in our driveway unannounced, carrying a bouquet of lilies and wearing an expression somewhere between relief and vulnerability. I greeted her at the door, heart pounding, while Layla peeked around the corner. "Aunt Cynthia," I said, gesturing her inside. She stepped into the living room, the walls now adorned with Layla's murals and our family photos, and placed the flowers on the coffee table. "I came to see the house," she began, voice soft, "and to apologize." Talia entered the room, her posture open but cautious. Our daughter emerged from her room, curious and unguarded. Cynthia surveyed the scene as though she were seeing her daughter's life for the first time. The built-in reading nook beneath the window, surrounded by cushions. The bookshelf loaded with stories. The hand-painted mural of stars and unicorns. She turned to Layla. "I'm sorry," she said, kneeling to meet her granddaughter's gaze. "I didn't understand what was happening that night. You deserve to be seen." Layla's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled and nodded. Talia reached forward and linked arms with her mother, a tentative bridge forming between past and present. I stood behind them, steady as a rock, feeling the weight of history shift once more. That afternoon, we gave Cynthia a tour of the house and yard, watching as her expression softened with each room. When we stepped outside to the garden bed we had planted together, she knelt in the soil and ran her fingers through the lavender blossoms. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I laid a hand on her shoulder. "This is home," I said. "And you're welcome here, if you choose." She looked up at me, gratitude shining in her eyes, and I realized something profound. The power of a gift isn't measured by its grandeur, but by its ability to transform the giver as much as the recipient. That evening, as we sat around our own dinner table, the three of us, mother, daughter, grandmother, passed dishes of pasta and bread while Layla recounted her day's adventures. The house was warm with shared stories, genuine laughter, and the soft glow of lamplight. We raised our glasses in a quiet toast, to beginnings, to courage, and to the family we had chosen to build together. In that moment, I understood the truth of Talia's words. Sometimes the greatest gifts come last, and once opened, they keep giving for a lifetime. 1 year after the envelope, our Christmas morning began with the smell of cinnamon and the soft glow of string lights framing the tree. The house felt familiar in a way no Hallberg mansion ever had. Warmth breathed through every corner, carrying the echoes of laughter, tears, and small victories we'd shared. I rose before dawn, padded into Layla's room, and found her perched on her bed, whispering to Rosie. She looked up, eyes bright, and held out a small package wrapped in sparkly paper. "Daddy," she said, voice trembling with excitement, "this is for you." I sank onto the edge of her bed and accepted the gift. A framed painting she'd done of our family in front of our new home. In vivid watercolor hues, Talia and I stood on either side of Layla, whose curls bloomed like a halo as she held the cream envelope close. Behind us, the oak tree Talia had planted that spring stretched its bare branches toward the sky. Underneath, in a child's scrawl, was the title she'd given it, "The Gift They Forgot to Give." I swallowed hard, blinked back tears, and hugged her close. "It's perfect," I whispered. "Thank you." Her grin was the sunrise, bright, uncontainable. She leapt off the bed and dashed downstairs, the painting clutched to her chest. In the living room, Talia stood by the tree, mugs of cocoa steaming in her hands. She slipped the mugs into my arms and kissed me softly. "Merry Christmas," she said. I wrapped my arms around her, breathed in her scent, and felt the solidity of us, our love made real in walls we chose, in trust we built, and in courage we found. Layla skipped over with the painting. She placed it beneath the tree, adjusted the frame until it caught the light, and stepped back with a proud nod. We sipped cocoa and watched her, the glow of the tree reflecting in her eyes. For a moment, we existed in stillness, 3 hearts beating in unison, bound by a promise we'd made on that fateful December night, to see her, to honor her, and to give her the power of choice. Then came the gifts. No designer labels, just thoughtfully wrapped presents that spoke of understanding. Talia received a set of antique law books she'd coveted in graduate school. I unwrapped a leather-bound journal embossed with my initials, a gift from Layla and Talia, a place to record my hopes, our memories, and the stories I'd yet to write. But the most cherished gift of all was the trust and the home we'd given our daughter, now immortalized in her painting. After the unwrapping, we piled onto the couch in our pajamas, groggy, warm, content. Layla read aloud from a new storybook, her voice animated. Talia leaned against my shoulder, and I stared at the painting beneath the tree, marveling at how far we'd come. I thought of Cynthia's parties, the list that omitted our daughter, and the moment Talia rose to right that wrong. I thought of every hesitation, every whispered prayer that we'd have the strength to break free. And here we were, bound not by obligation but by love, with a daughter whose future stretched before her like an open field. Later, we ventured into the kitchen to bake cookies, sugar stars, and gingerbread men, our laughter echoing off the walls. Flour dusted the countertops, and icing smeared our cheeks. It was perfectly imperfect. It was home. As the afternoon light dimmed into evening, we gathered around the dining table for a simple feast: roast chicken, roasted vegetables, and mashed potatoes made with love. We offered toasts to family, to freedom, to the courage it takes to wrap a gift in silence and let it speak volumes when opened. Layla raised her glass of apple cider and said, "To new traditions." Talia and I echoed her sentiment, and in that instant, I felt the weight of the past lift entirely. When the dishes were cleared and the fire crackled low, we settled by the tree once more. Talia took my hand and whispered, "Thank you for believing in us." I kissed her hand. "Thank you for daring to give the greatest gift of all." Layla nestled between us, and we sat in a circle of three, silhouettes outlined by tree lights. Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting onto the window pane. Inside, we sat rooted in love, our hearts full. Sometimes the most lasting gifts arrive quietly, wrapped in courage, sealed in love, and meant to be opened, last. And every time we look at that painting, we'll remember the night everything changed.